Alright, hello everyone. I'm gonna talk about the ledge for a bit and what you can do to maximize like the most percent and most stocks you can potentially get while your opponent's at ledge. I do a lot of lessons on Metafy, and I have gotten a good amount of students, and a big common problem with them is just that kind of playing at ledge and feeling comfortable like keeping their opponent in disadvantage and having that concept drilled in. So I figured instead of just going over that with every single time that I have a lesson with a new student, I would just make this video so that I can link it to them, and if people learn this for free in the process and feel like my lessons are good enough to book one for themselves, that also helps as well. So if you're listening to this and you haven't booked a lesson and you just found it by chance, or you found it through the recommended tab and you'd like to book a lesson, the link to my Metafy is below. But even if you find this helpful and you don't end up booking, I hope this is a little bit helpful to you, because I think this is a really interesting concept that a lot of people, once they have it drilled into their neutral and once they have it drilled into their autopilot, they'll notice themselves playing a lot safer and a lot smarter as a result. So let's talk about ledge and let's get started. When your opponent's at ledge, they are obviously at ledge. Big surprise. This is your opponent. They are at ledge right now. They are grabbing it. It looks like they're not, but they are. So when your opponent's at ledge, yeah, they're at ledge. Big shocker. And when you're ledge trapping your opponent, you're inhabiting roughly this end of the stage. If you're ledge trapping your opponent on the left side of the stage, you're probably inhabiting the left side of the stage. If you are all the way over here, there's a good chance you're not getting a ledge trap on your opponent. There's a good chance your opponent is not really in disadvantage if they're at ledge, which is a problem. So my first pointer is to be near your opponent when they're at ledge, though that's a very obvious point. The next point I want to make is when you're ledge trapping, obviously, and stuff like that, you're generally inhabiting this area of the stage. We just went over that, right? So where do you think personally, I'll let you just sit and think about it for a couple of seconds, where do you think that the best possible point on the stage is to sit for you to ledge trap your opponent? If you answered roughly at roll distance, which around like this distance right here on this dotted line, I believe that you are correct, and a lot of other good players believe you're correct as well. And I'll explain why. In Smash Ultimate, because we're playing a fighting game, even though it's a platform fighter, stage control is a very, very important component of this game. And if you have stage control, you're able to be a lot safer with a lot of what you do. That concept is very much expedited at ledge. It is much more important at ledge, because when you're at ledge, not only do you have to get off ledge, but you have to regain stage control. You have to push through this wall that your opponent creates when you're at ledge. I probably should have made this a pink arrow, so I'll do that just for ease. You have to push through, after you get up, through your opponent's defense and break through their stage control in order to get some sort of meaningful interaction off, or be safer with your interactions and then eventually get something off. And that's really important. And if you have knowledge of that and you're the person on green and you're the green dotted line, you can take a lot of advantage of that, because when you realize it, you really have a lot of stage control here. I'll make it a bigger dotted line so you see that it's a different kind of like thing to show. But you have all of this stage to work with here. You have all of this area, right? And your opponent, in comparison, has this. Do you see where the problem is here? You have roughly, I want to say, like a good 80% of the stage here. You have a good 80% of the stage here, and your opponent is just sitting like with scraps almost, right? They're sitting with absolutely like nothing, zilch. It's really, really hard to get around this right now. So if you sit at roll distance, you're constantly putting your opponent in a situation where no matter what ledge option they choose, no matter how they choose to get up, they're going to be put into a situation where they're just not having stage control right away, and they have to get around you. So that's the first step for the ledge trap, is just making sure that your opponent can't instantly get back stage control. And to just kind of give a refresher really quick, the options that your opponent can choose at ledge, and I'll put them in... I'll put them in yellow. I know we're using the whole entire rainbow here, but it's just so that you guys can kind of, see things properly. Your opponent has neutral getup and attack getup, obviously, which just kind of cover the same area. Your opponent has roll getup, which is kind of represented by this pink line here. They'll just go right to you. And then obviously they have jump. And jump is a little bit of an issue, and it's something that we'll talk about actually in a little bit, because jump can be a lot more ambiguous than these other ledge options. If you choose any of these other 3 ledge options, we'll call them grounded ledge options to just kind of keep it simple and keep it kind of grouped. If you choose grounded ledge options, if your opponent does rather, you're still at this roll distance right here. You're still sitting pretty at this dotted line, and you still have all of that stage control to work with. So it's really important to just kind of recognize that and see. And I'm going to delete those dotted lines because, you know, it's kind of clear the stage control is there now. It's very clear that, like, your opponent kind of has to get around you. Once you kind of have that perspective, and once you kind of have that visual image in your mind, it's your opponent has to get around you if they choose any sort of grounded get up option. And if they choose jump, then they still need to get around you, but it's a little bit different and it's a little bit weirder. So let's talk really quickly about pressuring ledge and how pressuring ledge is going to get to be a bit different for you. Because if you're adopting this mentality, that means you're kind of sitting at this distance, right? And if you're sitting at this distance, what does that leave open? That leaves open this area, and that leaves open this area. You leave open the areas of jump and neutral get up. You do by sitting at roll distance, and that's just because if you're hard covering one get up option, you're very likely leaving open one or the other 2 areas that you can land in. So it's kind of important to note that you are giving up this area of the stage. And that is a fact. Like, there's this strongest, quote unquote, strongest strategy does have like some sort of weakness in that your opponent has a much easier time choosing neutral get up. Your opponent has a much easier time jumping from ledge because they know they could potentially juke you out in some sort of way and land safely. They have a lot that they can do here, but ultimately, you have the stage control and you have the ability to make the correct moves here. And we'll talk about that in a second. But we'll talk about really quickly punishing the neutral get up end of it before we go into jump. Because jump is very, very tricky. Neutral get up is actually a lot simpler. If you watch any top players gameplay, and I'm not going to include clips here, I'm just going to go over this in keep it digestible in one format. But if you look at players like MKLeo, for instance, they will be generally sitting like very much at roll distance, and they'll go from points of sitting at roll distance to kind of just dashing up and checking their opponent. Maybe in the case of Joker, throwing out like a forward tilt here, and then they'll generally just dash back to roll distance. And that's for 2 reasons, at least in my opinion. One, the dash forward into the forward tilt, or the dash forward into like a neutral air or something to check for a get up option, checks for that get up option. If the opponent in reaction to you dashing forward wants to get up, then you hit them for it, and that's great. If they don't choose to do that and you dash back, then the move gives you a good sense of timing, which is also very important. Because at ledge, there are 2 things that you can mix up. There are 2 things that you can mix up at ledge. And I know I am copying Khan Academy here with worse handwriting. I do not care. There are 2 things that you can mix up at ledge. The first thing being the option. The option that you choose at ledge can be mixed up. And the second thing is the timing. The timing of the option can be mixed up by you. You can mix up the timing that you choose your neutral get up. You can mix up the timing that you choose your roll get up. And that's all very, very important. And that's why when you punish neutral get up and stuff like that, you are inherently putting yourself at a risk. Because if you constantly run forward from here and you're constantly in this area, then your opponent can use the timing at ledge, like that we talked about previously, to sit here and see that roll get up is open. And because you're pressuring this area too much, they can go roll get up and they can get around you if they time their get up correctly. And because of that, they will have all of this stage control. The stage control that you previously had, they will now have. And you're trapped in the corner. You're still here. So you have essentially reversaled yourself by going for that neutral get up read that you probably wanted to try and get. Say you had a read that they were going to go for neutral get up and you had this really, really crazy forward smash that you wanted to go for. I know everybody has those moments where they think that they have the read and they just go up and they charge and it's just not there. And then your opponent just goes through you and it feels like you can never really truly get that read. it's usually because you're looking for it too hard and your opponent's just waiting for you to look for that read. And this is a classic example of that, and it's a good example of why you should be sitting at roll distance and respecting the fact that your opponent can think. They can mix up their timing. They can mix up their option. Your opponent has a brain, and a lot of people like to forget that when they're in advantage state. So sitting at roll distance is the optimal thing to do here, because if you pressure neutral get up too much, you run the risk of your opponent reversaling you by getting behind you and taking your stage control away. If you pressure it too little, however, your opponent will be able to freely get up into these get up areas and punish you accordingly, which is an issue, and we can talk about that now. So we talked about stage control. We talked about how your opponent having less stage control is bad, but we didn't really talk about how you can abuse that well. So let's talk about that really quickly. Let's talk about retreating options very, very briefly. There's a couple of ways that you can do options. You can do options approaching. You can do them standing in place. You can do them retreating. You can do them after a double jump. There's a lot of ways you can do options, but the three ways you can move with your options are by standing in place, by drifting forward, and by drifting back. That's for aerials at the very least. Same goes for grounded options, but replace drifting with dashing. So because of that, we can think about stage control a bit here and think, what does having stage behind you mean? Well, that means that you can retreat more with your moves. And by retreating more with your moves, you're essentially throwing hitboxes out and putting yourself behind those hitboxes while still moving back. Now, what does that mean for your opponent that doesn't necessarily have all the stage control in the world? Well, if they do choose to do neutral get up and they're currently right here, well, let's pretend that our opponent did neutral get up and safely got up here. If they choose to, for instance, try and pressure you for being at this area at this very given moment, and you choose to, instead of aggress on them or try and trade or run forward or something like that, you simply choose to retreat and throw out, like, for instance, I'm going to use Joker as a very base example here just because it's the character I play. For instance, I like to do like a dash back Iha with Joker or a dash back forward tilt. Or even dash back air, obviously, as well. You put yourself in a position where you're giving up a little bit of stage control. You're giving up roughly around this much stage control because you're going from here to here. You're giving up that little bit of stage control. But you're putting yourself in a position where if the opponent tries to get any bit of stage control when they previously had next to none, you're hitting them for it. And if you do hit them for it, where do they go? Well, they get sent right back off stage. And if they get sent off stage, they're put into the same position yet again, and they're right on ledge yet again. And that's what constitutes a good ledge trap. It's just kind of keeping your opponent in that corner, prioritizing just keeping them in disadvantage, not really trying to go for the super hard read, and just focusing on keeping your stage control, focusing on not letting your opponent get around you rather than trying to hit your opponent or to get that read or to focus on like the wrong things. You want to focus on keeping that stage because that stage is essentially like what constitutes your ability to stay safe. Because if your opponent's in this corner and they can't get through your retreating hitboxes, then their options become to jump over you or roll through you. And those both run very, very big risks. And you see top players punishing rolls all the time, and you kind of question why sometimes, because punishing rolls feels very, very difficult to do. But when a good player senses an opponent just is uncomfortable in the corner, that's when these crazy reads start to really come out. So let's talk really briefly about the one get up option we didn't talk about, and that will be kind of the end of this video, and that's jump from ledge. Now, jump from ledge is actually, in my opinion, one of the hardest things to deal with, and it's why I jump from ledge so often, because there is a lot you can do after you choose the option. And the most important part about it is if you have the timing down, the option doesn't matter with jump, at least in my opinion, because the truth of the matter is when you jump, you have access to a lot more resources and you're in a lot less lag than you are with roll and neutral get up. So if you make sure that you don't get hit during your initial jump up, for instance, if you jump up here and your opponent does not catch it, if you're not getting caught from that initial jump, you have the ability to sense whether or not your opponent's trying to hit you for jumping. And if you think that the opponent is, then you can double jump. If you think that they're not, then you can just land on stage. So it creates this pseudo flowchart of just like, oh, my opponent's this, so I can do that. And it's really tricky at first, and it can throw a lot of people off guard. But if you're the person on the green line, you're actually still an advantage here. And I'll kind of explain why. So if your opponent chooses jump from ledge, they have a lot of options, obviously. And I'm going to actually go ahead and remove the 1 and 2 over here. I'm going to use an eyedropper tool and just kind of get rid of all of this because unnecessary. And we need to draw more lines. We need to draw more arrows. So, okay. So your opponent is jumping from ledge, right? They're jumping from ledge. We've established that. So if you're the person in the green, your opponent could land here, or your opponent could double jump, or your opponent could throw out an attack and potentially land on the platform. That's kind of the three things that can come from this initial jump here, is they either land on the platform, they land at neutral get up distance, or they land, and I'll draw this arrow a little more pretty so it makes sense to you guys. They can either choose to double jump, they can choose to land on the platform, or they can choose to go to neutral get up distance. If you are sitting right here and you are in the green, if you are this person and they choose this option, they have essentially just kind of given you a delayed neutral get up. You're still in the same position that you'd be in if they chose neutral get up. You're just in a spot where it's just like they just did it with a little bit more time and a little bit more ambiguity, because they could have went to the platform or they could have double jumped. But you're still in the situation with neutral get up. It's the same exact situation, just delayed a little bit. So it feels weird, and you might overcommit because of that. So it's important to kind of just discern that. They have basically just chosen neutral get up, and they're on stage now. So you still have the stage control to work with. So that option doesn't really matter too much. So that leaves us with two options. That leaves us with the double jump, and that leaves us with the double jump, and that leaves us with the going to the platform. Now let's talk about platform really quickly. If your opponent lands on the platform, they actually are still in disadvantage, and a lot of people don't realize this. Especially if you're in this kind of a situation where your opponent's going to the platform while you're under it, they are most definitely in disadvantage, because I want you to think of this platform as a mini stage almost. I want you to think of this platform as like something that just like they have to get off, because stage control works two ways. It works in the aspect of the sky, but it also works in the aspect of the ground, where it's you have this whole entire stage now, and they have this little mini stage available to them, and until they get off of that, they essentially just have to respect you, because you can constantly just kind of like shadow them and move whichever way they go. So say your opponent does decide to land here and is like, oh, I'm gonna jump off of the platform this way, or oh, I'm gonna jump off of the platform this way. You can just follow them. You don't even have to go up and try and hit them for doing that. You can just follow them and stay on the stage, because ultimately, what is the big picture here? What is the hugest thing in the universe? They have to land. No matter how many resources they use, they have to land on stage. They have to land on stage. No matter which option they choose, whether it be drop the platform, run off the platform, jump off the platform, all of these lead into landing on the stage. And if they don't lead into landing on the stage, then you can go ahead and throw out a bunch of rising aerials onto this platform and just constantly shark them for trying to stay on the platform, because you'll just whittle down their shield and hit them eventually. So they're in a situation, if you take advantage of it correctly and you don't rush yourself, they're in a situation where they have to get off of something. They have to escape a situation that's bad for them. You just need to take action and take account of that and just kind of work from there. So that's important to talk about, because now platform is a lot less scary for you if they jump from ledge, because you at least have a general idea of how they can get off and what the best thing to do to punish that is, or at least the most consistent. Like I said, the best answer for every single situation is very ambiguous with a game like a fighting game, because sometimes people are thinking things completely differently from the norm. But going over the norm is really good, just because you have a general like idea of just kind of like the usual stuff. The usual stuff you're kind of looking to see. So I hope it helps in that way. So we covered the platform. That is all set. We covered the landing on stage after the jump. Now let's talk about double jump, because it's kind of similar, and it's kind of the last little point that we have here. It's very similar to the platform, just actually with a bit of a worse state, honestly. Because if you use your double jump right here, you're putting yourself at such a huge risk. Sure, you're avoiding your opponent, and if your opponent is dumb and tries to swing on you here for jumping, then yeah, you can take great advantage of that and just land on a platform and reset to neutral and be completely fine. A jump is a very good option at that, because you can just constantly kind of check your opponent to see if they're going to overcommit. So it's really, really good. If you don't overcommit, however, the more resources your opponent uses in the air, the worse off they really are when you think about it. It's very similar to off stage. If your opponent uses their double jump off stage and you intercept them with an attack of some sort and you just hit them away and they go flying, they don't get their double jump back from that interaction. It's very, very similar when they are landing on stage. It's just a lot easier for them to do so because of how much stage there really is to land on. That is, until you start to shadow them. Once you start to shadow them, it becomes exponentially harder for them to land on stage after they double jump. And here's why. Because they've used their double jump, they have access to two resources. They have access to two resources. They have air dodge. I'll just abbreviate that AD. They have their air dodge, and they have an attack. They can swing. So they can air dodge and they can swing. That's literally all they can do at this point, because they've used their double jump, so they can't use any more jumps. Obviously, there are characters with multiple jumps, so again, take this with a grain of salt. But generally, most characters in this situation, once they've double jumped, they're reaching that apex of their jump and they're coming down finally. All they have in this coming down period is their air dodge or a hitbox. And if they have a hitbox, it's usually pretty obvious which one they want to throw out, depending on which side of them you are. If you're behind them and they're just kind of like waiting and they're not throwing anything out and they're just kind of drifting more and more away from you, it's very likely they're going to try and cover themselves with a back air. Or if they're landing right on top of you, it's very likely they're going to try and air dodge through an attack of yours and try and punish you for doing it. Or they're going to land with a down air. It's really just like thinking about where you are and where they are and what they'd want to do. Like if you were in their shoes, what would you do almost in this kind of a situation? Because if your opponent... Right, and this is why shadowing works, because a lot of you might be skeptical and be like, okay, well, you know, it's really hard to just keep your opponent up in the air, and if it was that easy, then I would be able to do it every time. And you're right in a way. Sometimes you're going to mess this up. Sometimes your opponent's going to mix your ankles and juke you. But for the most part, if you keep this in mind, you're going to at least be able to practice it and get better at it, which is really important. Because let's talk about this, right? Your opponent has to land here. If they land on the platform from after their double jump, even if they land, right? If you maintain this distance, you're in the same situation as if they landed after one jump. It's just that they double jumped and landed. If they land here after double jumping and they don't try to take any stage control, and you maintain stage control and you stay smart and you shadow them properly, and you don't try to swing on this, you still have your ledge trap. You still have them in the corner. You still have that good situation. And if they try to come here and you shadow them for it and you just hit them for going center, then you send them off flying over here, or you send them flying over here, and then they have to land on you again, or they have to come back to stage again, and then you just keep them in disadvantage over and over and over. But it all comes from this shadowing. It all comes from following your opponent and being like, oh, you're going to be over here? All right, then I'm over here now. And I'm going to swing on you with this hitbox if you try to land on me. So it just becomes that. It really. Because ultimately, right, and this is the most important thing for you to realize about this and why you can shadow so safely on stage and why you don't have to worry about off stage so much. If your opponent double jumps or they single jump and they realize, uh-oh, I'm getting shadowed, or uh-oh, he's ready for my landing, he's ready for what I want to do, I'm scared, and they choose to go back to ledge, they have no invincibility because they haven't landed on stage yet at all. So if they go back to ledge, they have regrabbed essentially. They have forfeited neutral to you because you can just at that point shadow them by running forward, and then once you see them grab ledge, hit it with a down tilt, hit it with a forward tilt, or if their ledge hang is really good, run off and back air them for it, run off and forward air them for it. There's a lot you can really do off of that, and it all really just comes from playing patient here. That's the beautiful thing, is you get all of this reward from playing patient and reacting to how your opponent reacts to your patience. You are never really committing to anything here. Notice how throughout this whole entire 20 to 25 minute video, I never really said, you know, commit to swinging here. At most, we really said, like, you know, you could cover yourself with a hitbox. But I've never really said, like, you know, swing here so they do this, then that. This all comes from movement. This all comes from your character just simply moving around and being in certain positions. So this is information that almost any character in the cast can take to their advantage. I really hope this helps a couple of people. I tried to keep it short and sweet, but obviously it's a little bit difficult when you're talking about a concept as you know, complicated as neutral, to keep things short and sweet and to not go over too little. It's just really difficult to find a balance, so I hope that I was able to not really stumble over my words too much and I was able to help a couple of people out. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys do like these kind of videos, I would be much more willing to make stuff like this in the future if support is given for it. I am looking for like an actual job right now because content creation is tough, but I'd be more than willing to do stuff like this on the side. I love teaching people stuff, and even if it's like not helpful to some people, as long as I'm helping a couple people out, it means a lot to me. So thanks for watching. Appreciate it. Again, if you guys want to book a Metafy lesson with me, if you want a personal lesson, if you want me to talk about more than just the ledge, if you want me to go into your player habits, your stuff like that, and just kind of iron out stuff with you and make you a better player, if you feel like I'd be good enough to do that for you, then I'd be more than happy to take you on as a student. Link for the Metafy is in the description below. Thanks so much for watching again. I appreciate it a lot, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.